this is a vision, this is something beautiful and perfect. We're all in it. It's the start of something, not the end. So let's do it. And I want to welcome one of the people that's inspired this right from the beginning and been a fabulous help, aid, guide, motivator, and that's Kit Duval. Morning, Kit.
Morning to everybody. It's great to be here.
I'm going to read a little biography I have of you, because some people won't know necessarily all about you, and I'm going to make sure that they do. So Kit is an award-winning writer whose novels place ordinary people at the centre of the story. Her debut novel, My Name is Leon, in 2016, a fabulous book, was also the winner of the Kerry Group Irish Novel of the Year. And she was shortlisted for the Desmond Elliott Prize, amongst others. Before writing professionally, Kit worked for 15 years in criminal and family law and has sat on adoption panels and advised social services on the care of foster children. Kit has frequently advocated for working class writers, and in 2016 she launched the Kit Duval Scholarship at Birkbeck, providing a fully funded place on Birkbeck's part-time MA in creative writing. This goes to a talented student who would otherwise not be able to afford to attend and participate. It's now in its 4th year. Kit's second novel, The Trick to Time, was published in March 2018 and longlisted for the Women's Prize, and her first young people's novel, Becoming Dina, is shortlisted for the Carnegie Medal Award. She also crowdfunded Common People, a book I'm very familiar with and I know lots of you are, which is an anthology of working class memoirs by new and established writers. She co-founded the Prima Donna Festival in 2019, and in response to the COVID-19 crisis, she founded the Big Book Weekend, a free virtual literary festival which had an audience of 24,000 people. She also writes for theatre and television, and her latest book, a collection of short stories called Supporting Cast, is published later this month. Thank you. What an impressive leading that was. Thank you very much for coming along and helping kick off this superb conference. I've got some questions. I'm gonna open with those. You wanted to have more than and I like this because the whole thing is about dialogue, and we're going to open with a dialogue rather than you just launching in, which I really love, and I appreciate you giving us that. Kit, we had a conversation back in November when the world seemed a very different place, but the same dream still seemed in place. And I thought, then one of the things that kept coming up as we started the process of creating this conference was, what definition are you working from? And whose definition of working class is this going to be based on? I thought, well, mine or yours or whoever's. But you gave me some real strong advice then. And I wonder, could you talk to us a little bit about what is working class? What do you think those definitions are?
Well, I was asked this question hundreds of times when I was doing Common People, particularly. I've always been asked it, but particularly when people were wondering whether they could submit their work to Common People, they'd say, oh, could you tell me if I'm working class? Because my mum was a cleaner, but then she became a teacher. My dad was on the shop floor, then he became a manager. Does that make me work? And literally, there were, apart from the arseholes, and there were many of those who were asking the question, there were also some very genuine questions. I don't know if you know Dr. Dave O'Brien, Edinburgh University. He does a lot of work on class and culture. And so because he's an academic, he has to actually use something measurable. And I think he works to your working class depending on the profession of your main carer breadwinner when you were 14. He can tell you more about that. I wouldn't use that as a definition, but he's got to use something. He also uses national statistics, socioeconomic clusters, which is very employment based, which again isn't, for me, perfect. Perceptions have changed since the 70s, and I think in the 70s, when I was young, it seemed to be far more delineated about who you were. You normally had a job for life, or the perception of a job for life. Your house was a home, it wasn't an investment. And people seemed much more willing, if you like, to know and keep their place. In the 20s now, there's much more fluidity of movement between jobs. between houses. Your house is seen as investment. You trade up, you trade up, you trade up, and that kind of shit. Try and keep my language in check. And also our identities are much more up for grabs now. Sexual identity, gender identity, class identity. It's much more about self-determination. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. So I think if somebody says, I'm working class, that was good enough for me. No one seemed to be taking the piss about that. But it is a movable, fuzzy thing. It's not clear. It's not, you know, it's difficult sometimes and not always. And I always use the example of, you know, it's definitely not economic based. It's not about how much money you've got. Otherwise, the example of Wayne Rooney, you know, Wayne Rooney, multimillionaire, is he middle class? I wouldn't say so. Is Raheem Sterling middle class because he's got millions and lives in a big house? To me, no. They might see that differently. It's almost easier to say what it isn't. And so for me, it's not about lifestyle. It's not about job. It's not about any of those things. It's much more about, for me, something about your heart. Who is your tribe? Where do you identify with? If you see people on the street, do you think that's me or that's me? Are you super aspirational about getting away from being working class? Because so many people seem to be. I mean, it's the problem I have with, what do they call it? Social, you know, when they try and take kids from working class communities and elevate them. I have such a thing with it, can't remember what it's called. Anyway, I don't like that idea that if everyone could ski, we'd be okay. Do you know what I mean? That whole thing about being ashamed of where you come from and constant betterment, constantly better yourself, as though there is no value in being having a working class life and appreciating who we are. Social mobility, that's the word I was thinking of. I definitely don't have a working class lifestyle, not at all. My children, I would say, would consider themselves middle class. For me, there is absolutely no doubt, and never has been, that I'm working class. When people asked me for, when I was doing Common People, I would literally say, you decide. It normally came from a good place in that people didn't want to be, you know, didn't want to be called out on it. You know, I live in a big house, I've got a big car, I've got 2 holidays a year. I don't have to be poor. Because when I was growing up, we wouldn't have made it into the working classes. We were underclass, way, way underclass. We were that word that people don't use anymore, poor. We were poor children and a poor family. And anyone that cut their sandwiches on the diagonal was posh to me. Do you know what I mean? That was like, well, you know, you're posh, look how you're eating. So I definitely always have allowed people to say I'm working class or I'm not. It's a difficult thing these days because it's just not as clear. The jobs have gone that would have immediately marked you out as being working class. That's a very, very different thing these days.
Yeah, not so clear a definition. You know what he told me in November, and it stuck with me? He said that when you read about the working class and you read people talking about the working class, do you feel a kick in the stomach, or do you feel like, yeah, they are a group that need discussing and helping? And like that was kind of a meeting. Yeah. And I mean, you've said that there in different ways, but yeah, that was really powerful to me. I'm going to have another question for you, Kit, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Working class writers and the Common People anthology. I mean, it's a brilliant book. There's loads of great expositions of different kinds of life and all that about diversity, you said. And why was it needed? Why do we need an anthology for working class writers in the same way, you know, but why do we need a conference for working class academics?
As far as publishing goes, I did Common People because of the bollocks assumption that the cream rises to the top. And that was said to me 100 times, 200 times. So if your writing's good enough, you're going to get it published. And it was it's so untrue. What that is actually saying is that all you've got to do is be good enough and you'll be successful. The built into that is a narrative that you've got to work harder. You know, it's your fault you're not where you should be. There are no barriers to being successful. There are no barriers to getting your book published. That the people that have got their book published have got there on merit, and some of them have, but that merit has sometimes been given a massive, you know, help up, because there's many barriers in publishing to success. There is networking, which is very, very important. I don't know about academia, I'm not in it, but in publishing, networking is really important. Being seen at a talk, being, you know, meeting your top author, meeting agents, all these things really matter if you want to get your work published. Then all of those, 90% of those events happen in London. So get to London. So if you're, and this happened to me more than once, and it didn't matter because I could afford it. But when I was first looking for an agent, the agent would say, oh, I've read your stuff. Do you want to come down and see me at 3 o'clock on Wednesday? Obviously in London. Now, like I say, I could do it. If you're a single parent living in Doncaster, getting to London for 3 o'clock on Wednesday, and there's no options. It's not, we'll do a phone call, and it was pre-Zoom world. It was like, come and see me. And that meeting might be half an hour. But the perception amongst the, you know, the literary world is everything happens in London. You come to us, we'll tell you something, then you can go home. It'll cost you 200 quid, you'll have to get childcare, etc., etc. So there's all that going on, got to be London centric. Then there's cultural capital. So what language do you use? What are you talking about? What books are you referencing? Have you got the right language, dress, all these invisible codes that help you oil that networking so that people feel comfortable talking to you? Have you got the right accent? Content of your writing, another barrier. So that your work's being read by middle class people, generally speaking. Do they understand what you're talking about? Do they have any frame of reference whatsoever? And then, and this was the big one for me, the freedom that you have as a working class writer to write what you want. Because what happens in publishing is working class people have to endlessly regurgitate their own story. So you're working class, you need to be telling us something about a tower block with some heroin needles in the stairwell, how hard it is, and probably getting knocked about by your boyfriend. Give me that story and I can probably sell that. What you can't do as a working class writer is write the next Pride and Prejudice, the spy thriller. You've got to tell us your own story, and that story has to be miserable, with a nice bit at the end about how hard you worked and finally got your own house, or whatever shit that they expect to hear. What I wanted to do is to show that is just not the working class life for a start, that there are many, many ways of being working class. It is not the, you know, the tower block in Scunthorpe or whatever people think, because obviously all working class lives happen up north. That's the first thing. It's always up north. And the other word you always hear is gritty. That's it. Gritty up north, gritty up north, gritty up north. You know, not the West Country, not Norfolk, not Scotland, not the Northeast. It's just the North. And the North starts about Milton Keynes upwards. It's just anywhere that isn't central London, anything, you know, beyond the M25. And so it really annoyed me when people said the cream gets to the top. The cream does not get to the top. The cream is prevented by structural inequality and the decimation of the welfare state and all sorts of things that I won't go into because I will be here all day. There's many things that prevent the working class writer from getting to the top, not least the fact that working class people work. And so the time that they've got to write and the time that they've got to dedicate to their craft is considerably reduced. They might live in poor housing, etc., etc. And so there's so many things to get over before they even put pen to paper, let alone trying to get that paper into Waterstones. And so I wanted to say, look at this talent that you are missing because of the way you've structured publishing and the way it's grown up. And also, when I spoke to the really well published working class writers, they were very keen, you know, and for every well-known writer that I got into this book, I said, look, we're going to get an unknown writer into this book to give them that step up that so many middle class writers seem to have through connections and through just the fact that they live nearby or they know someone, etc., etc. So that's really what I wanted to do. And it was an utter, you know, this is us, you know, read it and weep, basically. And there was a complete knob that said to me, if they were any good, they'd be published already. And I can remember just saying, you know, I think I put it in one of my launch talk. I said, you know, to that knob, read it and weep. It's great. There's some great writers out there.
Thank you. I'm going to just veer off. I know I had some questions, but Scott Free has asked a question.
Yeah.
Should or can, because based on your background as well, this kid, should or can working class background be a protected characteristic in employment discrimination law? What do you think of that?
I think yes. I do think yes. The only problem that we would have is defining it. You know, it really would be, I think, difficult to define, and we'd have to come up with something that was a really definite thing that you know, that wasn't the fuzzy thing. So maybe it would have to be what your parents did when you were 14. I don't know. I'd love it to be a protected characteristic. I'd love people to have to demonstrate that they aren't continually employing people that sound and look and exactly like they do. And that definitely is publishing. Publishing is one of the most unequal of all the professions. And yeah, completely. I really would like it to be protected. I don't see it happening, I have to say.
No. Okay, thank you. One thing that we picked up, and it's a big theme of this conference, and it came from you, specifically from you, is a celebration, not an apology, which came in Common People. But can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yes. I really just, you know, I really kick back against this notion. And again, it comes down to social mobility, that a working class life is something to be escaped. It's just, you know, as I say, you know, we should all be skiing. We all want to live this life. We all want to do this, and we all want to basically be middle class. You know, the sort of Thatcher doctrine of be constantly getting away from this life, be constantly pushing it behind you and forging on to home ownership or whatever it is that, you know, she aspired that we should all have. And I think it's down to us in many ways to reclaim the space that has been trampled on by middle class experiences, and to celebrate who we are, where we come from, our accents, our dress, our behaviour, whether we call it dinner or tea, our rites and rituals, and our solidarity, which I do think has been eroded somewhat. But there used to be much more solidarity. Certainly the solidarity I feel with other working class people in the world. You know, I look at America and I look at Spain and, you know, places of high unemployment, and, you know, that's the solidarity that I have with other working class people. And we do have that all over the world. And that's gone throughout history, where working class people from one country have supported working class people in their struggles in another country. And I think we don't talk about that enough. It's not talked about enough. Because for so long we have been encouraged to be other than we are, and to not say, you know, this is a great life. This is a life of, for me, of laughs and making the best, definitely, of a bad situation. I'm not rose colouring how difficult it can be to have a working class life, and there's many things about it that we would all like to change. I left school when I was 15. I left home when I was 16. That's not healthy for anybody. So it's not fantastic. But there is much about it that is fantastic, and that, you know, what we think and the things we hold dear are something to cherish and to celebrate and to laugh at, and not causes for shame and not causes for comparison either.
Thank you. That was a great response. I'm going to go back to some of the questions that are coming up. Craig Hammond, who's speaking later on today, he says that it's very difficult to quantify being working class, and even when an economic transition's taken place, these values, these experiences remain, and I think they remain for a lifetime. That's my experience, at least. But I'm going to go to a couple of others that you will be able to. Chloe McLean asks, who do you write for when you write, and who do you imagine or want your audience to be? And should you write for your own audience? Well, I'll say your own. Should you write for a specific class-based audience? And Lucas Carey asks, and Lucas is in Australia, he's doing a great blog for us. I like the term own your own narrative. What do you think about that term?
Great. It's great. I mentor a lot of working class writers. And what I find, certainly when they're starting out, is they're trying to be something else. They're trying to write differently than they speak. They're trying to elevate their writing. I use that in quotes, so that it's literary, instead of owning your own story and your own voice. And you know, it's good enough. It's more than good enough to compete with the perception of literary works. Coming to the question of who do you write for, first of all, you have to write something that you think is great. You know, you have to love your own work. You have to write so that you appreciate it and you enjoy it and you're proud to sell it to someone else. That's the most important thing completely when you're writing, is that you love your work and you believe in your work. And secondly, you write the best book that you can write, and not for anybody, unless you're writing about a specific subject. Let's say you're writing about football or you're writing about bird watching, then obviously you've got an audience. But if you're talking about writing a novel, you just write the book that you write and the audience will find you. I wrote a book about a little boy in care, and generally speaking, people do not care about 9-year-old boys in the care system unless they're in the news for doing something bad. There are thousands of children in the care system that get no attention whatsoever until it's how much they cost, or one of them's done something against the law, or somebody's died in the care system. And when I wrote that book, I thought social workers would read it. I thought my mom would read it. I thought my brothers and sisters and my mates would read it, but I didn't know people would read it. But it's still the story that I wanted to tell. And the most powerful story is the story that you cannot keep quiet about. And that's the story that everybody should write. Thank
you. Michael has asked, please define working class. I'm just going to say, well, I think we covered that right at the beginning of this. And I think the whole experience of the next 2 days is there's no single definition. So I think that's something we can look at.
Yeah.
And Gordon has asked something, and he says there seems to be something possibly important to the dialogue about an increasingly speeded up recomposition of class. You know, so how I think you referred to that as well, about how class changes and it's fluid, and it's not just class, it's a whole host of identity markers that change.
Yes.
Have you any more to add to that?
It only that it's, you know, it's a fuzzy thing. It's just not really well delineated. It was much more so when I was growing up. I think it was much easier to identify, even by the street you lived on, you know, what class you were, and that has gone. It really has changed so much for the better. A lot of the time, a lot of it is for the better, in that we aren't confined to those things. But there still is a difference, and certainly people in academia will know there's a difference. I certainly know there's a difference in publishing, and I didn't know when I was growing up. I would never have used the term working class. I didn't know what it meant. There was posh people, there were poor people. I was poor, and that's all I knew. I remember when my husband I said to him, oh, well, you know, something about, oh, you're middle class, aren't you? And he said, upper middle class. I was like, fuck me, upper middle class. I didn't know that. You know, I just thought there was the Queen, then there was other people, and then there was me. I didn't know that even within the middle class people, you know, they're all looking for these markers as to, oh, well, you know, where do I fit in? So ingrained in it is this country that even within a class, there is a distinction that people want to recognise, that people want to hold on to and use as a rung of the ladder to get to this mythical place of success.
Thank you. Catherine's asked a question, and it fills very neatly into the question I wanted you to launch us from, actually. She says, it's interesting and helpful to hear about creative writing, and thank you. And could I ask whether the same is true of academic writing? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring it to the last question I had for you, because you have said throughout, even though you've kindly agreed to come and do this and you've been really supportive, that you don't consider yourself in any way to be an academic. But I think even though you've had massive success in academia, actually, and also achieved on that level, could you tell us why this is important? What the next 2 days bring to the world, and why these great speakers and all these delegates that have come from all over the world, actually? What's this about?
I've really had so little academic success. I did my creative writing degree, which is basically just writing, at 51. And I've got 2 honorary doctorates, which you cannot count. I've done absolutely zero to get them. So I really don't know much about academia. I'm sure it's a very particular world with its own rites, rituals, and complications. I do know that if anyone has come to this conference, they have come because there is an issue in their lives and in their working lives that has arisen out of being working class. It could be that, you know, some people have imposter syndrome. Should I be here? Or their imposter syndrome is forced upon them. You know, should you be here? It could be that, you know, through your life, through your working life, you have condescension. You have people taking the piss out of your accent, or assuming that you're here to bring the coffee into the conference, which I've had many times. And many bad things, if you like, many negative things in your working life about being working class. There might be some really great things about being working class in academia. Identification with your students, the subject matter that you can talk about with some personal knowledge. I'm sure there's great things, and I'm sure there are challenges. And I think if there were no challenges, most people wouldn't be here. There is nothing better than a good moan. Nothing. Even if all you get out of the conference is that you can say to somebody else, did that happen to you? Yes, it did. That's really, really important, to be able to say to someone, is this, you know, am I thinking this? Am I being gaslit about this? Is this, how did you cope with so-and-so? How did you manage to turn this around so that you can be successful in your subject? How have you dealt with promotions? How have you dealt with being overlooked? How have you, you know, dealt with people being condescending to you, or taking the piss out of you, whatever it is, being excluded from things because you're not valued? So all of those things are really important. Just the solidarity of having someone saying, yes, that happened to me, is massive. And then, of course, there's the sharing of strategies that you might have to use at work, and the sense that you're not alone, which is so important in any walk of life, to have that feeling that you are actually part of a tribe, that you have people that understand what you're talking about. I think it's really, really important.
Thank you. We've got a few minutes left, and there's a range of questions are flying in, and that's lovely to see. Darren asks, what do you think working class values are? I know we've referred to them, and solidarity comes through a lot, and I really go with that. But and I think he is right, actually, in that I've recognised this as well. Often we talk about working class as not being middle class, rather than a thing in and of itself,
Yes,
which is simply a symptom of the whole thing. And I don't actually know that, Hannah. Who anyway? Another question is how the writer's social class affects your way of writing and thinking. Do you know? Is there a thing that can you tell that somebody is working class by the way they write and the things that they think? Lucas in Australia again, he's talking about imposter syndrome again, and what's the pressures to fit into a particular publishing whole. I think you talked a little bit about that actually in terms of the, you know, the gritty up north kitchen sink drama type approach. Yeah. And then James, I'm going to land on this, and this will be the last thing I ask you, but it's a great question. He says in the current BLM debate, you know, so Black Lives Matter debates on TV, he's noticed that there's a number of Black and Asian people who talk about solidarity with white working class communities and shared experiences as well as the differences. But he's also noticed that white liberal middle class interviewers either ignore the commentary or twitch uncomfortably. Is this just me, or have people noticed this? That twigs with me. I don't know. Talk to us, Kit, about.
I think people are really, really uncomfortable about saying white working class and Black working class. I think white working class people are perceived to be, you know, Brexit voters, basically. That's what the perception is. That, I mean, and also it's a narrative pushed by this government, and I won't even go there, but it's a narrative pushed by the government that it was the white working class people that wanted Brexit, basically, because, you know, you can go to Peterborough and get a couple of sound bites and it looks like that is the truth. So they're very, very wary about talking about white working class people and the Black Lives Matter movement. Of course, there's huge solidarity between those two classes, white working class and Black working class people. And I used to, an example I can give you is I used to administer a grant, and the grant was for Black writers, without going in any detail. And I used to have so many Black writers come and apply for the grant, and some of them were really, really wealthy. They didn't need the grant. But it was, the perception was Black people are poor, and the perception, and so you'd have white people who would need some help that could apply for a grant for Black people. I have more in common as a working class person with a white girl in a tower block that's on the dole than I do with a Black African in Ghana. Of course I do. We have the same upbringing, we have the same lots and lots of the same values and background. So I think there's a massive amount of solidarity between white and Black working class people that is uncomfortable for white liberal middle class people. They don't know what to do with it. They don't know where to position it. They don't know how reliable it is. They're uncomfortable having that debate because they're scared of being accused of being racist, blah, 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 blah. So I think if you're working class, it's not a difficult conversation to have at all. And we all understand where that comes from. We understand that solidarity. But I do think it's a solidarity that we can't take for granted either, as we did see with the Brexit vote. It isn't that there's solidarity with anyone that's poor and any economic migrants. You would expect there to be some solidarity between white working class people in this country and people from another country that haven't got enough money and have come here to work. And that is not an assumption that we can make.
That's a superb answer. Thanks, Kit. And Gordon asks us to remember not to homogenise working class cultures. I think you've done a great job in showing that that's exactly the point of what we're talking about. And thanks, Gordon. And also, I think that that's what this conference is all about Indigenous knowledges, about small and micro communities, about people who aren't heard. And they are speaking, but they're not heard. I think that's the difference. And the response to this conference has been superb. The questions are brilliant. Everything about what we're going to do is powerful. And you have helped open it in a real firework display of superbness, I think. Thank you, Kit, and thanks everybody for the questions, and thanks for being here.
Thank you.
And I think that's us. We're going to hand over to Alex now in the control room, and she's going to bring us up with Craig and the next group. So stay with us. We've got a great piece. Thank you so much, Kit.
Thank you. A long time. Thank you, everybody. It's been great to be here. Have a good time.
Thank you.
Bye.